In the summer of 2025, Eagle Dynamics updated George with an array of new functionality, transforming the process of locating, identifying, and engaging targets in the Apache. I've seen lots of players not using George's new abilities to their full potential. So in this video, released as of April 2026, we're going to help you get the most out of George as your Copilot gunner. Let's get started. Let's set up our controls. Find AH-64D George AI Helper in the drop-down menu. Here we're going to bind George AI up, down, left, and right. Usually these are best set to a POV hat or a castle switch. Now find AH-64D Pilot in the first drop-down menu. Scroll down to George AI in the second drop-down menu. And here we're going to bind George AI Multifunctional Input Center, quite the mouthful ED, George AI Show and Hide, and George AI TAD Store Target. Bind all of these to your stick or throttle. We'll be referring to George Multifunctional Input Center as just George Multi from here on out. This binding replaced the now legacy George Consent to Fire command. Don't forget the very useful TAD Store Target. That's going to be very useful later on. Now we can move on to the new AI interface wheel. So by hitting the George AI Show and Hide, we can bring up a familiar George AI interface wheel. You'll notice some new elements. Let's relate their visual positioning to their control functionalities, moving from the center outwards. The inner circle represents our George Multi binding. The top half is the given command with the short press. This is approximately half a second or less. The bottom half is the command given by a long press. This is anything longer than a half-second press. George Multi-Short would be, in this case, a TADS point search. George Multi-Long would be a TADS area search. The middle ring represents any given George directional inputs as a short press. In this case, George Short Press Up would command a pilot helmet sight search. George Short Press Right would command George delays or delays a selected target. George Short Press Left would command him to weapon action switch the next cycled weapon. George Short Press Down would command him to deslave the TADS. The outer ring represents any of the given George directional inputs as a long press. In this case, George Long Press Up would command George to enter free fire mode. Long Press Down would command him to search the TADS line of sight. You get the drift. Now we understand how the controls work against the interface, we can delve into practical employment. Our first George AI menu is a no weapon page. This should be your default method of operation most of the time. It's important to understand that the design of the latest George CPG AI is based around a methodical flow. Plan, search, identify, and then engage. Planning is deciding on where you will operate, including battle positions, where you will be searching for and identifying targets once you're on station. The no weapon page gives you the best tools to do so before you're ready to engage. Begin or reset here when you are not actively employing munitions. I'm going to start from 12 o'clock and work clockwise. Let's first look at the direct PHS search. This is what most of us would be used to. As you can see, as we command George using George Short Press Up, he will slew the TADS to our helmet line of sight reticle. You can see the TADS line of sight via the queued line of sight reticle. Looking ahead, we can see the home plate or navigation fly to queue symbol for waypoint 2. Here we have a row of some evil T-55s. Let's PHS search command to this point.
And slaving. Deslave.
As you can see, George has now found and identified a couple of tanks. Our wheel interface has now changed. And we have a target list that has appeared on the lower left of the screen also. Let's start with the target list. Depending on range, bearing, occlusion, and general visibility, George will be able to identify a target as friend, foe, or neutral. He may simply categorize the target, for instance, as armoured, infantry, or AAA, or in this case, classify as a specific target. In this case, a T-55. He will also rank targets top to bottom based on threat priority. The wheel interface shows us some new commands. George long press up and down will cycle the TAD's FOV zoom. Here we can zoom in, and again, and then back out. Long George multi will cycle between the forward-looking infrared and DTV. It's particularly useful for confirming visual identification. George short press up and down will cycle through the targets on the list. George multi short press will add a target to George's shoot list in sequential order. Pressing again will remove the target from his list. Once you're happy, George short press right will track the first or selected target in your list. If you want to cancel or reset, George short press left will exit the list to start again.
Target acquired.
We're now back to the no weapon page. We can use George multi-short to cycle FOVs and long press to cycle between FLIR and DTV. At this stage, we could short press right to begin lasing the target. This is useful for remote lasing for a third party, or if the pilot wishes to action a weapon in the back seat. Or we can short press left to command George to action a weapon himself. We're going to begin lasing this T-55.
Laser on.
Now we can employ a useful functionality of George. Hit your bind for the George AI TAD store target.
Lased and stored.
George will now store this as the next sequential target, in this case T02. We'll use this later. Lastly, if we wanted to check the area again, we can use the TAD's LOS search with George long press down.
Lasers off.
This will command George to perform a momentary search along the current TAD's line of sight. From here, we can select a target from the list again,
Tracking target.
and carry on engaging or identifying targets as and when needed. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We have plenty of time to put warheads on foreheads. Let's reset. George short press down will slave the
And
TADs
safe.
to fixed and save the weapons. Next up is point searches. Let's head to the point search page by pressing George long press right. From here, we have some new options, as well as a list on the left of the screen. We also have controls in the short press ring for navigating said list. Sound familiar? With long press left, we can cycle between waypoints and hazards and control measures. With long press right, we can select from a list of targets and threats. Lastly, if we had multiple stored targets, George multi-press will select the last stored. Since we only have one, let's select T02 from before, the short press right to select. We're back to the no weapon page. We can short press George multi, which will slave the TADs to T02.
Aircraft's armed. Roger. Slaving.
Short press on George multi again will search for targets.
Empty slaved.
You can use this on any waypoint or target point. Pretty neat.
Tracking target.
Let's reset again with George short press down.
Aircraft safe.
Area search is an extremely useful new function to George. It can be engaged with George multi long press. It provides the player with additional situational awareness and continued scanning of an area prior to engagement. Whilst in the no weapon page, we can access the various modes of area search with George long press left. From the list, we now have a few options. Forward area, the default mode, commands George to perform a continuous 90-degree search pattern directly forward of the helicopter. This is particularly useful for transitional flight and maintaining awareness as you approach a battle position. PHS area is similar, but will command George to scan a 45-degree pattern to the pilot helmet sight. This is different from the direct PHS search, as it is a continuous mode rather than momentary. FCR targets will generate a target list for George based on the last scan burst of the FCR or via RF handover from another Apache. He will then enable the C-scope and attempt to identify the targets. If the targets are already destroyed or hidden from view, he will announce it. Lastly, own PFZ and active PFZ will command George to search for targets or designate already identified targets within ownership assigned PFZs. I won't be covering these last two, as it's rare to be using PFZs in most combat environments. However, if there's enough demand, I'll be sure to cover it in a future addendum. FCR targets is a useful and interesting mode, especially when trying to VID FCR targets before employing Lima or Kilo Hellfires. So let's select that. Now, let's fire up the FCR and conduct a single scan burst. Pressing George multi-long, you'll see that he sleuths the TADs over and starts to identify targets.
Aircraft's armed.
As we move up and down the list, you'll notice they'll go from a category to a confirmed type.
Tracking target.
Now we're ready to move to the next stage of engagement, targeting and designation. Once we're happy that the target is hostile and we're ready to engage, we can switch to our weapon of choice. George short press left will cycle through our weapons in the following order: guns,
Blazing. Gun lost.
Hellfires,
Hellfire's up.
rockets,
Selecting PDs.
and then back to no weapon.
Lasers off. DWASD.
George can sometimes image auto-track onto unfortunate parts of a vehicle. These can include things such as a barrel, turret basket, even aerials. And they can result in laser overspill and cause the weapon to land short or long. To avoid this, each weapon page now has an additional command called ADJ+, or target adjustment. Fly stable, then press and hold George multi for as long as you require to allow George to gain a solid center mass image auto track.
Roger.
He will continue to laze throughout, and you can adjust this after weapon fire if you're careful. This is by far one of the best additions to the new George CPG AI, and will reduce your missed shots considerably. Target adjustment command is only available whilst George has an actioned weapon. But let's reset. We're at our last stage of engagement, weapons employment. All weapons pages include the commands for hold and free fire, IAT adjustment, deslaving, and the TADS line of sight search. George multi-short press will provide George with a single consent to fire command. This is best used in the majority of engagements. George long press up will let him loose in free fire mode, where he will also work through a target list until all units are destroyed. Caution is advised, and be sure to identify between friend and foe before engaging this mode. The gun. This is most effective from around 3 kilometers and less, and used on low threat targets. George will begin lasing, and you will have the ability to adjust his burst length between 10, 20, 50, 100, and all using George short press right. Pretty self-explanatory.
Gun set to 10.
We're going to set the gun back to 20.
Setting burst to 20.
Keep in mind, The gun is an area effect weapon, not a precision weapon. But let's give these roustabouts a piece of our mind. Take that, you bloody buggers.
Those are good hits.
Marvelous. Rockets. The rocket page provides us with slightly different information. Instead of burst length, George short press right adjusts the rocket quantity between 1, 2, 4, 8, 12, 24, and all. If more than one type of rocket has been loaded, George long press left will cycle through.
Selecting the loop.
For this demonstration, I'm going to pick high explosive, and I'm going to cycle through to a quantity of 2. This will help keep the airframe stable as equal off-board weight and force are applied to both sides of the helicopter. Lastly, when employing rockets with George as the CPG, the pilot will need to WAS the rockets in the back and fire manually. The fire command, usually taken for George multi-short, now provides a field of view cycling for the TADs. When WAS'd, co-op symbology will appear in the IHADs to the bottom right. Co-op is by far the most accurate way of employing the 2.75-inch rockets. Get into trim, keep up a decent speed, and go into a slight dive.
Match and shoot.
Line up the I-beam with the cued line of sight reticle, match, and shoot. Our friend and hot Asian dad, Schoolio64D, has covered proper rocket employment in his own video. Link to that will be in the description. Hellfires, your most potent weapon. The AGM-114 Hellfire comes in 2 flavors. Kilo, which is semi-active laser, and Lima, the radar Hellfire. We have some new options on the George AI interface wheel. George short press right will cycle your employment between lock-on before launch and lock-on after launch. After selecting low-al,
Missile mode low out.
George long press right will cycle between direct trajectory,
Missile set to low.
low trajectory,
Setting to high.
high trajectory,
Missile set direct.
and then back to direct. These are used under various conditions, including where terrain masking is a consideration. Most employments will use a low ball, so George short press right will get us back.
Missile set to low ball.
George long press left will cycle between SAL-2, semi-active laser, and RF, radar Hellfires. When George employs radar Hellfires, he will provide target information to the missile using the TADs. Since you've gotten this far, and you've been very patient, let's take out those T-55s.
Aircraft's arm. Roger. D-slave.
We'll give George 2 targets.
In range. Ready to launch.
And we'll go into free fire.
Engaging. Slewing to the next target. Target in sight. Blaze.
104th Maverick and Wags both have foolproof videos on Hellfire employment. Links to both will be in the description. So there you have it. Be sure to experiment, use these various tools to your disposal, and most importantly, enjoy yourself. There's a lot to the Apache, and once all of these tools click, you will become a menace to the battlefield. These latest updates to George means he's extremely capable, but he's still evolving. As a wish list, I'd suggest the following things to ED. Firstly, less repetitive voice lines. Tiring to keep hearing slave, deslave, slave, deslave. Situational callouts. We've seen this in the Mi-24's Petrovich. Stuff like that would be absolutely fantastic for giving us an extra layer of situational awareness. Support for the laser spot tracker. This is a tool that the front seater has and is extremely useful in getting a bearing down on a target that is being buddy lased. Lastly, the ability to bind some of the interface wheel functions to specific keybinds. If you found this tutorial helpful, please like, subscribe, leave a comment. This helps get the video out there and hopefully help others as well. The next video will be shorter, I promise, and it will cover some small tips and tricks for using the Apache. Cheers, happy hunting, and I'll see you in the next video.